There comes a moment when a person realizes that life was never happening to them. It was happening from them. And when that moment arrives, something shifts forever. Most people spend years trying to fix the world outside, never noticing that the real mechanism shaping their money, relationships, confidence, and destiny has been operating quietly within them the whole time. What if everything you call your life is just the reflection of one thing, the image you hold of yourself? What if the real God you've been searching for isn't in the sky, but in the awareness watching your thoughts? And what if changing reality is not about effort, luck, or timing, but about aligning your inner identity with the version of you that already exists in imagination? Neville Goddard said this understanding is the true key, the one hidden in plain sight. The key that explains why some people transform their lives effortlessly, while others repeat the same patterns for decades. Today, you're going to see exactly how God, self, image, and reality are not four separate ideas, but one single mechanism that has been shaping your world since the day you were born. And once you understand how they interact, nothing in your life will look the same again. He begins to notice that everything in his life starts in a quiet place inside him, a space he rarely paid attention to before. Before any decision, before any reaction, there is this silent I am observing everything. Most people run around searching for answers outside, forgetting that the source is already lit within them. In that inner space, reality is still fluid, waiting to be shaped. And that's exactly where Neville Goddard's teaching comes alive. As he realizes that the I am consciousness Neville isn't just a poetic phrase but the actual starting point of creation, something shifts. It's not about reacting to life, it's about radiating life. Every feeling, image, and emotional response flows from that center. Awareness doesn't only witness, it produces. And creation always begins with identity, even if no one ever explained that to him. Some days he wakes up wondering why life plays out the same old script. Later he sees that the script comes from within. His consciousness keeps replaying old patterns like a forgotten playlist looping in the background. When he finally pays attention, everything gains a new meaning. He understands that reality, what he calls life happening, is just a reflection of the deepest image he holds of himself. He tries to explain this to a friend once. It's not that God is far away, it's that God is your awareness. But most people aren't ready to hear that. The idea behind God's self-image reality, Neville Goddard, feels strange at first because it points inward, not upward. It removes excuses, but gives power, real power, the kind he didn't know he had. He starts observing little moments throughout the day, like when he thinks of someone and they suddenly message him, or when he feels a nudge to avoid a place and later discovers something happened there. These tiny events make him realize awareness is not passive. It communicates, responds, guides. The more conscious he becomes, the more imagination proves itself as a creative force. One day, while reading Neville, he feels something familiar rising within him. The idea that imagination creates reality explained isn't new. It feels remembered. He closes the book for a moment, breathes and wonders, what if this has always been true and I just didn't see it? That single question changes the way he sees everything. He begins seeing awareness as a lens. Whatever passes through it gains form. If the lens is clouded with old beliefs, life looks distorted. But when the lens is aligned with the feeling it real Neville approach, things flow more naturally. It's not luck, it's alignment. So he starts clearing this inner lens every day, almost like a personal ritual. Slowly, something interesting happens. When he shifts his inner state, people respond differently. There's nothing mystical, just simple cause and effect. The law of assumption identity makes sense now. As he becomes more confident, the world mirrors that confidence. As he feels more loved, love shows up around him. Life starts to feel like cooperation instead of resistance. He secretly tests the live in the end idea. He imagines a conversation, feels the emotion of a wish fulfilled, and then goes about his day. To his surprise, situations begin aligning themselves. It's like his awareness organizes the world quietly, behind the scenes. Each time it happens, he understands himself a little more. Eventually, he realizes that nothing starts outside. Everything begins with acknowledging the simple truth of I am. When he embraces this, even silence becomes meaningful. It feels like opening a door that has always been there but remained untouched. And once he steps through it, he senses that understanding awareness is only the beginning. The next step is discovering who the self truly is. He starts to sense that the person he thinks he is, The name, the age, the habits, the story is only a surface layer, a costume, a role. Neville Goddard's teachings make him realize that the true self isn't the character, but the awareness watching the character. And once he recognizes the observer within him, something profound shifts. He stops feeling trapped by who he has been. It's strange at first to detach from the personality he's carried for decades, but the more he pays attention, the clearer it gets. The personality changes with time, but the observer doesn't. That inner witness has been there in childhood, adolescence, adulthood, unchanged. The one who sees, the one who imagines, the one who feels, that's the self. And this self is the creative center that shapes his world. He notices this especially when he watches his own reactions. Sometimes he gets angry or insecure or overwhelmed, and then suddenly he observes those emotions from a distance. The observer is calm, while the personality is in chaos. That moment reveals a secret. If he can observe it, he can change it, because the observer is greater than the reaction. Neville often said, "Imagination is the creative power of the self," and he begins to test this daily. He imagines a scene, holds it gently, and notices how it affects his feelings immediately. It's as if imagination speaks the native language of reality itself. And every time he imagines deliberately, he feels the truth behind the law of assumption identity, working quietly beneath the surface. People around him start noticing a difference. He seems lighter, more intentional, not because his life suddenly got easier, but because he's no longer identifying with every fear or worry that rises. He realizes the personality worries, but the self doesn't. The personality doubts, but the self knows. The awareness behind the mask is stable, unshaken, deeply creative. There's a moment when he remembers a childhood experience, daydreaming about a future event that later happened almost exactly as imagined. That memory hits him differently now. It wasn't coincidence, it was creation. It was evidence that imagination creates reality, explained not as theory, but as lived experience. And suddenly, so much of his past begins to make sense. He begins treating imagination like a tool instead of an escape. Instead of worrying about what might go wrong, he intentionally imagines what aligns with who he wants to be. The shift is subtle but powerful. Worry feels like unconscious imagination. Vision feels like awakened imagination, and his self is always steering the direction. What surprises him the most is how effortless creation becomes when he stops trying to force things on the outside. When he sits quietly and feels something real internally, the outer world starts rearranging itself in ways he could never have planned. The observer within him is the architect, and imagination is the blueprint. Slowly, he begins experiencing a sense of freedom that has nothing to do with circumstances. He's no longer chained to his past identity because he now understands he is the one who created it, and if he created the old image, he can just as easily create a new one. The self is limitless, even if the personality sometimes forgets. By the time he reaches this point, he senses that there's something even deeper at play, something about the relationship between God, self, and image that he hasn't fully understood yet. And he feels that discovering this will change how he sees everything that comes next. He starts to realize that the greatest misunderstanding he ever carried was the idea that God was somewhere out there, watching him from a distance. That belief made him feel small, powerless, dependent on outside forces. But Neville Goddard's teachings flip that idea on its head. They reveal that God is not distant. God is awareness itself, and once he sees this, the separation collapses. For years, he prayed like someone begging at a closed door. He hoped someone stronger, wiser, greater would hear him and grant him a solution. But he never imagined that the one who hears and the one who asks are actually the same consciousness. When he separates God and self, he unknowingly hands over the very power that shapes his life. He begins to notice how often people speak as if God is an external judge. If God wants, if God allows, if God decides. They treat life like a lottery, hoping for divine approval. But when he looks closer, he sees the truth Neville pointed to. The God they talk about is the very awareness experiencing their thoughts. And separating that awareness from themselves creates a sense of spiritual exile. That separation also creates fear. Fear of choosing wrong, fear of being punished, fear of not being worthy. Those fears don't come from God, they come from misunderstanding. If God is the I am, the consciousness within him, then he has never been unworthy. He has simply been unaware, and awareness is something he can awaken at any moment. He starts paying attention to how his inner world responds when he assumes something new. When he imagines confidently, he feels aligned. When he imagines fearfully, he feels disconnected. It becomes obvious. The connection or disconnection was never with an external God, but with his own creative self. The unity is always there. He's the one who forgets. Neville often said that assuming something from a place of separation will never manifest, and now he understands why. If he believes the power is outside him, he imagines as a beggar, not a creator. But when he embraces the truth of God's self-image reality Neville Goddard described, he imagines from identity, not from lack, and creation finally starts to feel natural. Little moments in daily life reveal this unity. When he feels inspired to take a certain action, when a sudden idea pops up at the perfect time, when intuition speaks louder than logic, he realizes these are not coincidences. They are signs of oneness, God expressing through self, awareness guiding image, reality adjusting itself around an inner assumption. He remembers a phase in his life when he felt abandoned, praying desperately for help that never seemed to come. Looking back now, he sees it clearly. Help didn't come because he didn't believe he had access to it. He believed the source was outside. And as long as he held that belief, his consciousness mirrored it. Awareness always reflects identity. But now every time he says, "I am," he feels something different, a sense of authority, belonging, and quiet certainty. He doesn't need permission to create. He needs alignment. And alignment comes from recognizing that the creator and the self are not two. They have always been one. As he embraces this truth, he senses the next question rising naturally. If the self is one with God, then what role does the inner image play in shaping reality? And the moment he asks this, the next insight begins to unfold. He begins to understand that the world isn't responding to his wishes. It's responding to his self-image. The picture he holds of himself quietly shapes every decision, every reaction, every expectation. It's like carrying an invisible blueprint that the outer world faithfully follows. And until he changes that inner picture, nothing outside can truly transform. He notices this in simple moments. If he sees himself as someone who always struggles, life brings more struggle. If he sees himself as someone overlooked, people seem to ignore him. But on the rare days when he feels confident, worthy, capable, the world responds immediately. It's not magic. It's the law of assumption identity working behind the scenes. This realization makes him rethink years of frustration. He used to ask, "Why doesn't anything change?" without realizing that his inner image never changed. He kept trying to improve circumstances while holding a self-concept tied to lack. Neville Goddard always emphasized that imagination creates reality, explained through identity, not effort. And now, that becomes painfully clear. He starts to see the self-image as the foundation of everything. The way he speaks to himself, the stories he repeats mentally, the emotions he habitually carries, all of it forms this inner picture, and that picture acts like a filter. No matter what opportunities appear, if they don't match the image he holds of himself, he unconsciously pushes them away. There's a moment when he catches himself saying something like, "I'm not the type of person who," and he suddenly freezes. That tiny phrase reveals the entire mechanism. His assumptions about himself limit what he allows into his life. Reality cannot contradict the identity he maintains internally. It can only reflect it, again and again. He begins experimenting with shifting this inner picture, not in a dramatic or forced way, but with small adjustments. He imagines himself responding differently in familiar situations. He practices feeling more deserving of good things. He adopts subtle emotional tones of certainty, safety, and confidence. Slowly, the old image begins to dissolve. Unexpectedly, people start treating him differently too. They seem more attentive, more respectful. Conversations flow more naturally. Opportunities appear where there were none before. It's as if the outer world was waiting for him to update his inner settings, and every change inside creates an echo outside. A perfect demonstration of imagination creates reality. He recalls Neville's teaching that feeling is the secret, and realizes that feeling reinforces the self-image more strongly than thoughts. If he feels unworthy, no amount of positive thinking can override that. But if he feels aligned with the new image, even for a moment, the shift begins. Feeling it real becomes not just a technique, but a way of being. Over time, he sees that self-image is not fixed. It's flexible, adaptable, rewritable. What once felt like part of his identity now feels like an old habit, and as he consciously chooses who he is internally, the world mirrors it with surprising precision. The unity between God, self, and image becomes undeniable, and yet he wonders, if the inner image defines reality, how does one choose the right image, the one aligned with the life he truly wants? That question naturally leads him to the next step. He begins this practice by asking a simple question that Neville Goddard repeated often: who must I be for this to be natural to me? At first, the question feels philosophical, almost vague, but as he sits with it, something inside him responds. He realizes that every desire already contains the version of himself capable of experiencing it. The desire itself is a clue pointing toward identity. Instead of trying to force change on the outside, he starts exploring the inner version of himself who already has what he wants. Who is he when he feels secure? Who is he when things flow easily? Who is he when he stops waiting for signs and begins assuming the state? These questions pull him into the heart of the law of assumption identity, where identity shapes outcome. He notices that his old approach was always external. He used to think, how do I get it? But this practice shifts the focus to, who am I being? That single shift changes everything. He begins to understand why Neville emphasized living from the end. If he embodies the version of himself who already has the desire, the outer world eventually adjusts to match the inner decision. To make this practical, he starts writing, not affirmations, but descriptions of his new self-image. He writes how this version walks, speaks, responds, and feels. He imagines everyday scenes, waking up calm, receiving good news, handling challenges with confidence. These aren't fantasies, they're rehearsals for identity. And each rehearsal strengthens the new self-image. Some days the old self resurfaces, doubt creeps in, fear whispers, but instead of fighting it, he observes it. That simple act reminds him, if he can observe it, he's not defined by it. The observer, the deeper self, chooses which identity to embody. So he gently returns to the inner version aligned with his desire, even if only for a few minutes. He starts noticing small but meaningful shifts. He reacts differently to situations that used to trigger him. He feels more patient, more grounded, more aware. These subtle changes reveal something crucial. The new identity doesn't begin when reality changes. It begins when feeling changes. Feeling it real, Neville style, becomes an anchor, not a technique. He also realizes that stepping into identity isn't about pretending or acting fake. It's about choosing emotional alignment. If he wants abundance, he practices feeling supported. If he wants love, he practices feeling lovable. If he wants confidence, he practices feeling capable. The practice isn't about achieving, it's about becoming. Sometimes he imagines talking to a future version of himself, the one who already lives the reality he desires. He listens to the tone of voice, the certainty, the calmness. That internal conversation becomes a mirror, showing him who he can be. And as he steps into that identity internally, the old self-image begins to loosen its grip. What surprises him most is how natural the shift feels over time. The new identity doesn't feel forced or artificial. It feels familiar, like returning to something he always was. The outer world hasn't changed yet, but he feels the change inside, and he knows the external will follow because reality always mirrors the image held within. As he continues this practice, he begins to sense the next phase, the emotional power that fuses identity with creation. And he intuitively knows that feeling, not thought, is what makes the new self-image come alive. He starts to notice that thoughts alone don't create much change. He can think positively all day and still feel anxious, still doubt himself, still imagine worst-case scenarios. But when he changes how he feels, even slightly, everything inside him begins to shift. Neville Goddard was clear: feeling is the secret. Not thinking, not forcing, feeling. So he begins observing his emotional state throughout the day, not judging it, just noticing. Some emotions pull him back into the old self-image: scarcity, fear, hesitation. Others pull him into the new one: calmness, gratitude, certainty. It becomes obvious that emotion is the bridge between self and image. When he feels aligned, the inner picture becomes alive and believable. He realizes that gratitude plays a special role. Not the kind of gratitude that waits for something to happen, but the gratitude that assumes it already has. That emotional frequency rewires his subconscious faster than anything he's tried before. When he feels grateful for something he hasn't seen yet, his imagination treats it as real, and the subconscious accepts it without resistance. Then there's certainty, a quiet, grounded knowing that doesn't shout or argue. It doesn't need evidence. Certainty is the emotional signature of identity. When he feels certain of who he is, even for a moment, the new self-image locks into place. It stops being something he's trying to believe and becomes something he simply is. He begins practicing emotional alignment in small moments. While brushing his teeth, he imagines the feeling of already being the person he chose to become. While walking, he breathes in a sense of inner calm and confidence. Not big scenes, not long sessions, just subtle emotional nudges that reinforce the new identity. And these tiny nudges begin shaping his entire day. Sometimes he catches himself slipping into the old emotional pattern, frustration, doubt, impatience. Instead of fighting it, he pauses. He places a hand on his chest, takes a slow breath, and gently returns to the emotional tone of his new identity. He learns that persistence is not force. Persistence is softness, returning again and again to the feeling that matches the desired image. What surprises him most is how quickly emotions influence the subconscious. A single moment of feeling real can outweigh hours of mental effort. The subconscious doesn't respond to logic. It responds to emotion, and once a feeling becomes familiar, the subconscious begins rearranging everything to match it. Thoughts change, reactions change, even intuition changes. He even notices how his body responds. When he embodies gratitude and certainty, he stands differently. He breathes differently. His tone of voice softens. People interact with him differently. It's as if his entire energy field shifts, and the world picks up on it instantly. That's when he understands deeply that imagination creates reality, explained through emotion, not reasoning. The more he practices feeling, the more natural the new identity becomes. It stops being something he has to remember and becomes a state he naturally returns to. He's no longer trying to feel a certain way. He begins being the person who feels that way, and that distinction changes everything. As he continues mastering the emotional foundation of identity, he senses the next challenge rising. What happens when the outer world contradicts the inner shift? And how does he hold the new image when life still reflects the old one? That question prepares him for the next step. He quickly learns that the moment he shifts internally, the outer world doesn't always change right away. In fact, sometimes it looks even more contradictory at first. It's like reality is showing him the last echoes of his old identity. At this stage, many people panic and give up, but he begins to understand that these appearances are nothing more than delayed reflections. Neville Goddard often spoke about the bridge of incidents, and now he sees exactly what that means. The outer world must realign to match his new assumption, but reality moves like a shadow, always a few steps behind the light of awareness. When he reverts because of appearances, he doesn't break the law, he just returns to the old identity. But when he persists gently, the new picture eventually wins. He starts noticing the temptation to go back to old feelings. A bad email, a disappointing message, a familiar setback. The old self-image tries to pull him into its gravity, but now he pauses. He breathes. He reminds himself, this is just the old me fading out. That single phrase gives him the strength to stay aligned with the new identity rather than collapsing into the previous one. Persistence becomes his superpower. Not forceful persistence filled with tension, but quiet, relaxed persistence. The kind Neville described, holding the desired state lightly like a secret he enjoys. He doesn't fight the old circumstances, he simply stops feeding them, and the moment he stops identifying with them, they begin dissolving naturally. He learns to treat contradictions like weather. Sometimes the sky gets cloudy, but the sun is still there. The new identity is the sun. The contradictions are temporary clouds passing through. They don't define him. They don't predict anything. They don't have the authority they used to. And with this realization, he stops reacting to every shift outside. People around him don't understand how he stays calm in moments that would normally bother him. They don't know that he's practicing something deeper, the art of staying loyal to a new self-image, even when nothing outside confirms it yet. It feels like building a bridge in the invisible, trusting that the visible will eventually catch up. He also notices a pattern. Right before a big shift, contradictions often intensify. The old self-image tries to survive by showing him proof that nothing is changing, but now he sees through it. That resistance is actually evidence that the new state is taking root. The subconscious is rearranging everything, and the old patterns are losing their hold. There's a moment when he laughs to himself, realizing how many times in the past he gave up right before things were about to shift. He mistook temporary echoes for final outcomes, but now he knows better. He knows that feeling it real Neville style isn't about reacting to circumstances. It's about holding the inner state until circumstances reflect it. As the days go by, he starts seeing small cracks in the old reality, little signs, subtle changes, unexpected shifts. They're not the full manifestation yet, but they're proof that the inner picture is winning, and each time he sees one, his faith grows stronger. Not faith in luck, but faith in law. And as he becomes more stable in this new identity, he starts to notice curious little signals, impulses, synchronicities, unexpected reactions that reveal the shift is actively unfolding. Those signs prepare him for the next stage. He begins noticing subtle changes long before the big manifestations arrive. At first they seem small, almost insignificant, but they carry a different energy. He catches himself reacting more calmly in situations that used to trigger him. That alone is a sign the inner shift is taking root. Reality responds to who he is being, not what he is wishing. Then come the impulses, sudden ideas that feel natural and aligned, a nudge to message someone, a desire to rework a project, an unexpected interest in something he never cared for before. These impulses aren't random, they're the self guiding him from the new identity. It's the quiet language of consciousness adjusting his path. He notices synchronicities appearing more often, numbers repeating, people mentioning topics he's been thinking about, opportunities showing up the moment he stops overthinking. These coincidences feel too precise to ignore. They act like breadcrumbs, confirming that the inner assumption is beginning to rewrite the script of his reality. He also starts attracting different conversations. People treat him differently, with more respect, more warmth, more curiosity. It's subtle, but it's consistent, and he realizes that the world mirrors his upgraded self-image. When he feels more confident, opportunities seem to recognize him. When he feels more deserving, life responds with unexpected generosity. Some days he receives compliments he never used to hear, or someone expresses trust in him in a way that catches him off guard. These moments are signals, small reflections of the new identity forming in real time. They may not be the final manifestation, but they are proof that imagination creates reality, explained through lived experience. He wakes up one morning feeling lighter, as if something old fell away overnight. There's no dramatic event, just an internal sense of renewal. That feeling becomes one of the strongest signs that the shift is real. The subconscious has accepted the new identity, and now reality is beginning to reorganize itself around it. Even his internal dialogue changes. Instead of doubting, he finds himself thinking, maybe this is working, then I think it's working, then of course it's working. That progression happens naturally, without force, and each emotional shift reinforces the new self-image more deeply than any affirmation ever could. He begins noticing opportunities that match the new identity, emails that arrive at the perfect moment, invitations that align with his goals, resources that show up exactly when needed. Some of these opportunities seem ordinary, but their timing is extraordinary. They reveal that the outer world is catching up to the inner shift. Even challenges feel different now. Instead of seeing them as setbacks, he sees them as adjustments, the old identity making room for the new one. This interpretation makes every obstacle feel purposeful, not punishing, and because of that, he moves through life with a sense of quiet confidence that wasn't there before. As these early signs accumulate, he feels a new level of trust forming within him. Not trust in circumstances, but trust in himself, in the unity between God, self, and image. And with this trust comes the next realization. The ultimate transformation happens when he no longer needs proof at all. He reaches a point where something inside him settles. The anxiety he once felt waiting for signs begins to fade. The need for validation weakens. He stops checking the outside world for confirmation of who he is becoming. Instead, he feels a quiet knowing growing inside him, a certainty that doesn't need applause, proof, or reassurance. This is what real embodiment feels like. He realizes that the moment he stops needing validation, life stops feeling like a test. Nothing feels like a pass or fail moment anymore. He no longer asks, Is it working? Because he understands the answer doesn't come from circumstances. It comes from identity. His sense of self is no longer fragile. It doesn't sway with every message, bill, or reaction from others. It stands on its own. This shift creates a freedom he's never experienced before. It's the freedom of no longer outsourcing power to people, situations, or outcomes. He recognizes that God, the I Am, has never been outside him. It has always been the awareness within, the same awareness that imagines, chooses, and assumes. And when he feels this unity, the separation between creator and creation disappears. He begins moving through life differently. He speaks more calmly. He makes decisions without overthinking. He listens to intuition instead of fear, and he stops explaining or defending himself because he no longer needs others to understand his internal world. That peace becomes a sign that God's self-image reality Neville Goddard taught is now a lived truth, not just a concept. Even when things around him look unchanged, he remains steady. His emotional center is no longer tied to outcomes. He doesn't panic when something goes wrong or inflate when something goes right. Both are just movements in the outer world. They no longer dictate who he is. He has become the stable center around which reality reshapes itself. He notices that his desires now feel natural, not desperate. They don't feel like things he's chasing. They feel like extensions of his identity. He knows they're his because they align with the self, not the ego. And as Neville said, when desire and identity match, manifestation becomes inevitable, not by force, but by alignment. People around him begin sensing this shift too. They comment on how grounded he seems, how clear, how peaceful. Not because he learned a new strategy, but because he finally understands where his reality comes from. It doesn't come from luck, timing, or effort. It comes from the union of awareness, identity, and imagination. This deep embodiment also changes the way he sees challenges. Instead of seeing them as threats, he sees them as opportunities to reaffirm the new identity. Every difficult moment becomes a chance to say, I know who I am. And every time he chooses identity over fear, the new self-image strengthens further. He's no longer trying to convince himself. He simply knows. That inner knowing has a flavor, calm, warm, almost sacred. It feels like standing inside truth. And once he feels this unity within, he realizes there's just one final piece. Understanding how all of this, God, self, image, and reality, fits together into one coherent whole. That final realization is what the next topic will reveal. He begins to see the entire structure clearly, as if someone just turned on a light inside a dark room. Everything Neville Goddard taught starts connecting piece by piece. God is not distant. God is awareness. The self is not the personality. It's the identity he chooses to embody. The image is the assumption he holds within. And reality is nothing more than the reflection of these three working together. When he grasps this unity, everything becomes shockingly simple. Reality is not random, chaotic, or unpredictable. It's organized, it's obedient, it's responsive. It moves according to the inner blueprint he carries. And suddenly he understands why changing the world outside never worked. He was trying to rearrange the mirror instead of adjusting the face reflected in it. This realization changes the way he sees every desire. A desire is not something he needs to chase or prove worthy of. It's a signal from the deeper self, revealing the next identity he is meant to step into. The moment he assumes the feeling of being that version, the mirror of reality begins its slow, precise adjustment. Not because he asked, but because he became. He sees now that imagination creates reality, explained not as philosophy but as mechanics. Awareness gives birth to identity. Identity selects the inner image. The inner image generates feeling. Feeling impresses the subconscious, and the subconscious projects itself outward as circumstances. It's a perfect loop, a divine partnership between the seen and unseen. He learns to treat assumptions with reverence, because they are the seeds of creation. Every assumption he holds about money, relationships, health, worthiness becomes the image that reality reflects. And when he changes an assumption, he changes the entire timeline of his life. The mirror doesn't choose the reflection. The self does. There's a moment when he sits quietly and thinks about the years he spent feeling powerless, waiting for signals from the outside. Now he sees the irony. The power was always in the observer within, the I am that never changes. He simply didn't recognize it, and now that he does, he can never go back to seeing life the same way again. This unity also reveals why feeling it real Neville style is so transformative. Feeling is the glue that binds awareness, identity, and assumption into one coherent state. When he feels something as true, the subconscious accepts it, and once the subconscious accepts it, reality must mirror it. Not instantly, but inevitably. He begins moving through life with a new type of confidence, not loud, not forced, but deeply rooted. He knows who he is. He knows where creation happens, and he knows that the outer world is just a canvas waiting for the next stroke of inner identity. Every day becomes an opportunity to choose who he is being, rather than reacting to what he sees. He realizes that mastering this unity is not about controlling life, but about understanding it. Not about forcing outcomes, but about aligning identity. Not about begging for blessings, but about assuming them. And with this understanding, life stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like a collaboration between him and his awareness. As the unity of God, self, image, and reality becomes real to him, he feels something awaken, a sense of empowerment, clarity, and quiet certainty. It's the realization that the secret behind it all was never hidden. It was inside him from the beginning, and now that he knows it, he's ready to live it fully. Now that you've seen how God's self, image, and reality work together, the real question becomes, what will you do with this? Will you keep living from the old identity that shaped your past, or will you finally step into the version of yourself that your heart has been hinting at all along? Ask yourself, who am I being when no one is watching? What assumptions am I carrying that no longer reflect who I want to become? If reality is my mirror, what image am I choosing to project starting today? You don't need to wait for a sign. You don't need permission. You only need to choose the inner state that matches the life you want and persist in it gently, consistently, confidently. Reality will follow. It always does. If this message shifted something inside you, then don't let the momentum fade. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and stay close. Because every new video is another step deeper into mastering the power within you. Your new reality begins the moment you decide who you truly are.